Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining me from. I'm so pleased that you are joining me here for this Ruby live event all about sausage. My name is Barton Seaver. I'm joining you here from the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine, where I live with my lovely wife and our two boys, right on a little saltwater farm, right on the coast where it is a hot and very windy day. Yeah, thank goodness for the breeze today. But yeah, we got a lot of fun things to talk about today. Last week, my colleague Katie and I were filming a bunch of new content for the Ruby Pro course on sausage making. We did about 11 recipes worth of sausage, 5 to 10 pounds each of those. So it was sausage week over here. And so we thought with this live event that we would dive into this topic. So it is a very broad ranging topic with a lot of different details to it. I don't have so much demo for you to do for you today. But lots to discuss, and as always, take all of your questions. Any of you who have joined before any of these Ruby Live events know, over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a box up there. Type in there any question you'd like to see answered. It doesn't have to be about sausage. Anything you want to talk about, I am here for you. Treat this as much as an open office hours as it is about a themed sausage event. If there is a question that's already been asked over there to the right-hand side in the gray column, you can see there's a little heart icon. Just click that little heart icon to vote it up to the top to make sure that I get to it. I've got a relatively short hour with you today here, so let's dive into it. First and foremost, though, anybody who's joined me before know that I like to talk about gratitude. Cooking for people is an act of love. It is an act of kindness. And well, the world needs a lot more of that. So thank you for your interest in cooking and therefore in spreading love to others. But in cooking and in love, your first ingredient to me is gratitude. So something that I am grateful for today is a nice healthy breeze on a near 90-degree day. I grew up in the South, where I love being hot. I love being hot, except now that I live in Maine for almost 10 years now, I've sort of lost my heat mojo. So 90 degrees feels like a lot, but anyway, it's all wonderful. So I hope that you will take a moment today and every day to think about something that you are grateful for, especially when you start to cook. Just before you pick up your knife, just take one moment to say, I'm thankful for the food in front of me and for the people I'm about to feed. So anyway, with that, I am grateful also for you, the folks that I am about to talk to. So let's talk about sausages. The history of sausage is really about preservation, right? When you harvest an animal, there is a lot of that animal, and so quite a bit of it cannot go eaten in that time frame before it goes bad. And so sausage was a means of preservation, of course, to sort of lengthen the duration of that harvest bounty, right? And so we ended up with, well, all sorts of charcuterie, from prosciuttos and cured and preserved ham legs, ham hocks, things like that, bacons, things that were smoked, sausages, various trim and offcuts from the meat that were not really, full portions, etc. That would all be ground down together and then aged properly so that they could be eaten throughout the year, right? That was sort of the impetus of sausage, was really preservation. But recently, since the advent of refrigeration and, well, modern agriculture, we now have access to animal products far more often. And so sausage is now really more of an art form for the purpose of deliciousness. And, well, that's what it is today. And so there's so many different forms now, especially those charcuterie in the past 2 decades, really within professional kitchens, has really been sort of, I wouldn't say rediscovered, but reimagined and renewed interest placed in it. Because, well, it is an art form. It is an incredibly complex understanding of science and humidity and temperature and bacteria and salt and all these other wonderful things that go into these products that they themselves are nothing like the ingredients that went into them, but rather are some alchemical sum of them, by whether through the art of just preservation, desiccation, salting, fermentation, you name it. They have become something totally other. And that is a process that is really very much fun, especially for cooks who are deeply invested in our craft and in our art. That is something that, well, a lot of people take a lot of pride in, but also it's something that's just really a lot of fun. Those slow, long processes in which we have just a small hand in playing really humble the cook, I think, both to the ingredient and to the final outcome. And charcuterie is, in fact, a very humbling activity. So with all the sausages that we did last week, and that new content is going to be available in the coming months or so. Let's see, what did we do? We did a venison sausage that was highly spiced. We did a whole number of pork sausages, from a Spanish chorizo, which is aging in a dry fridge that I've got right now, to a Mexican style chorizo, which is a crumbly, wonderful cased sausage. We did bulk Italian. We did bulk breakfast sausage. We did an andouille sausage that I was smoking. I was actually trying to smoke it earlier today, but well, it's such a hot day out there that I couldn't keep my smoker at a low enough temperature. So I just gave up on it, and I'm going to do that again later tonight when the temperature cools down. But a whole lot of different things, a whole lot of different spices, seasonings, sort of, and outcomes from it. But that's really what's so wonderful about sausage, that it is such a global, well, undertaking, and that you can really be inspired as a cook to put in any flavors that you want. So let's talk about sort of the basics of sausage. So the basics of sausage, let's start it with just the meats that we use. Typically offcuts. So this is going to be your pork shoulder, pork trim. It's going to be a lot of the fat that has been trimmed off of other more prime cuts, say your pork loin, etc. Pork is the most oft used meat in charcuterie. Part of that is because, well, a lot of beef production goes into hamburgers, but since we don't eat many pork burgers, there's just a lot more sort of offcuts of pork out there, but it also lends itself better to it, just the flavors of it, the flavor of the meat itself, as well as the high level of fat content that pork have. So when you get down to it, about an 80-20 ratio is about what we're looking for typically in most sausages. And what that gets you is still a hearty, snappy, meaty bite, but you have all that fat in there to lend that juiciness, that richness to it, to help lubricate the whole thing, but also to help emulsify those sausages. So when you do grind that meat, you then end up paddling it together or whipping it by some means to bring it all together, so that the meat and the fat, the water and the fat, basically come into a form of an emulsion, and that keeps its moisture when it's then cooked. So of course you can make sausage out of anything, from bulgur wheat and vegetables to seafood to chicken to pork to beef. Literally anything you can make sausage out of. So we can discuss any of those. And already I see some questions, like from my good friend Judith T. Hi, friend, about seafood sausage, and we can dive into that. But let's dive into just the sort of the process of sausage now. So we've talked about the cuts of it. So typically pork shoulder is a good one. So if you are getting into this, and I see another question here from our friend Laura O. Hi there. Nice to have you join us. For a skilled amateur cook, what recipes do you recommend beginning with sausage making? So I'll sort of answer that question continuously as we go, but really a pork sausage is, I think, the best one to start off with because, well, it's very easy. The results are very delicious. The seasonings that you can use in them are nearly infinite, so you can really go your own route. But the first thing that you're going to need for sausage is some equipment, all right? Bottom line is you're going to have to grind the meat. Oftentimes there's a number of ways to grind the meat, and then you're going to need to stuff it. And that is what this is. I've got a number of different models. This is, excuse me, I have a sneeze coming on, I think. There it is. Excuse me. So this is the Westin number 10 Deluxe Heavy Meat Grinder. I've had this for years and years and years. I also have a KitchenAid attachment that plugs in right to the front of my KitchenAid. That takes a lot of the hand crank work out of this. This is purely human and mechanical means, as opposed to a KitchenAid, which is obviously going to have its own motor and drive some of that for you. So makes it a little bit easier, but also I think that takes away some of your control, some of the sort of intuitive feel that you begin to gain. So let's open this up. So the pieces that you're going to have for your grinder are going to be your grinder body. And this is going to have some means to attach to a base, whatever it be, countertop, cutting board, etc. I'm just going to pull out all of the pieces here. So a very important part of your sausage kit is the instruction manual. Don't ever forget to actually read that, right? So this will typically have something like that, a little foot or a plate that will help it connect to, and this will not actually fit over my cutting board. So, interesting. Hey, Richard, who is in my ear, my colleague at Ruby here. I'm going to try and switch over to this location, Richard, if that works. You can talk into my ear, if you will, and I can get up and adjust the camera if need be. But Richard, just let me know if that is working. I can also check over here and see. Yeah, it's okay. Good. Thank you, Richard. All right, it is working. Okay, so I've mounted that over here. It's got just a vice clamp on it. So this is your grinder body. This is the grinding tube. This is the feeding tube, and then this is the rear of it. So the rear part, the next part that I'll talk about is the auger or the worm. So this is what actually moves the meat forward through the grinder casing. I'm sorry, through the grinder body. It's going to have some various pieces. Always just read the instruction manual on whatever piece of equipment you're using. They're all going to be a little bit different, but pretty much the same. And that gets fixed all the way through there, and then a handle on the back. The handle usually gets locked on. How do we do this? There we go. All right, boy. All right, and I'm setting all this up for you just so we can show you. So I'll keep. All right, and then you've got pieces that are for stuffing, which are these over here. We'll get to those a little bit later. And then you've got your next pieces, which are your grind attachments. So you're going to have a blade that is at the end of your worm or your auger, and that just goes on there. And what this does is that worm or auger pushes the meat towards the blade. The blade is then put right up against the cutting die. This is a small, this is a large cutting die. So different sizes. You can do what's called a progressive grind. We'll get to that. But then the meat is forced through and cut by the blade as it goes through. So there's a little hook or a little indentation right down at the bottom. And that, I'm sorry, put the blade on first. And then that. And then your lock ring, which is a mechanism there. And I always give it a little bit of a turn, and that sort of frees up that lock ring. And what you want to do now is just give it a test. Can you push the grinder? And is it making any noise aside from just, acceptable noises? But did you hear metal screeching on metal, etc.? Do you hear anything that sounds like it's pushing too hard against something? If no, then you're good to go. So that is your whole setup. The next thing you want to do is let's talk about the cut on your meat. So here is the feeding tube, right? And you saw the overall size of the entrance here. So when you turn this, that's going to turn that auger, right? Don't cut your meat bigger than can fit into this hole or then through this hole, right? Through the auger. Duh, right? But it's actually kind of hard to remember that because it seems like this machine is going to do all the work for you. It will do most of the work for you, but you have to set it up for success. And the way to do that is to cut the meat into small. I never cut bigger than about 1 inch, okay? The reason for this is that it feeds easily through. You want that meat to go through the grinder easily. You don't want the machine or the effort to struggle against the meat. Also, when you cut it small, you're creating a lot of surface area. And the next step is once you've cut your ratio of about 80% meat to 20% fat, once you've cut it into small cubes, and they don't have to be perfect cubes, folks. We're not being tested on this because guess what you're going to do with them? You're going to grind them. Just cut them into basically even-sized pieces that are going to fit easily through here. The next thing you do is you then season your meat. And this is really the opportunity to get that seasoning deeply, deeply mixed into your whole mix. It's a lot better to mix it on the outside and then grind it because it ends up fully integrated than it is to take your raw, unseasoned meat, grind it, and then try and mix your seasoning in. A, it's probably going to be at least a little bit uneven. And B, you're then going to have to mix your sausage, maybe more so than you want to, right? That emulsion that I was talking about earlier, sometimes you want it to be just very slight. Other times, like as with a hot dog, it is a fully emulsified sausage where you want it fully emulsified. But bottom line is give yourself the control over this. And that means seasoning the meat at the outset. Let it sit for half an hour. The other thing to be really considerate here of is that everything is cold. Getting back to that emulsion. Emulsions between fat and water don't happen when they're hot. Well, in this case, I mean, you can make hot emulsions like a hollandaise sauce, for instance. But in this case, you want to keep it cold as possibly can be, to the point that you might even suggest, I would suggest even putting your metal canister and everything into the freezer for about half an hour before you get going. Same thing with your meat. Throw it into the freezer for half an hour or so. It's not going to freeze through, but it's going to give you greater structural integrity. You're not going to warm it up as much through friction in this mechanical process, which is pretty significant amount of friction. So you want to keep it cold. There you go. So another thing that you can do is also, when you are seasoning your meat, to mix in any liquid that you're going to be using. Like I made a Sicilian sausage that has pecorino and red wine in it. And I mixed the red wine in with the raw seasoned meat, as well as the cheese. Why? Well, for the same reason as I said before. I want it to be thoroughly integrated and mixed through the whole mixture without having to paddle it in necessarily overly so at the end. All right. So then we talk about grinding. So depending on the sausage that you are using, as well as the cut of meat that you are using, it depends on whether you want a large grind or a small grind. If you're going to be doing something like a hot dog, in that case, it is actually pureed together, so it creates a very, very fine, completely smooth texture. Whereas upon like an Italian sausage is going to have, you want it to have that crumbly texture to it. Typically, I grind through a medium grind plate as the best way to do this. This being a large grind, this being a small grind. Another way to do it is called a progressive grind. If you've got large cuts or something like you're grinding towards a hamburger, oftentimes hamburger will be ground first through a large grind and then through a small grind. And in that way, you get a better integration of fat to the meat. You get a better texture without any large chunks of sort of uncut meat, if you will. So you end up with a real, if you have that, you end up some real chunky bits in your mouth. That can be pleasant, but to me, that's really not what a hamburger is about. So that's called a progressive grind. And you don't need to do that in every situation. For most sausages, you can just go straight through a middle or medium grind for that. And then paddling. So paddling is that process of taking your mixture now. I would then put it back in the fridge, get it cold again, and then paddle it. If you have an electric mixer, KitchenAid, Hobart, stand mixer, something like that, you can just put the paddle attachment on. In about 2 minutes, anywhere from 30 seconds to about 2 minutes is usually enough, just until it has a ubiquitous texture so that it's sort of all integrated together. And you can tell this by sight, or you can also hear it. That when it's sort of slapping against the sides of the canister that it's being whipped in, you can tell that it's sort of pulling away. And this is the same as true with biscuit dough, with cookie dough, etc. There's a point at which it both looks and sounds combined, right? And it's that sort of intuition that you're looking for, but really no more than 2 minutes really is what you need to do. And then how to stuff. So let's talk about casings for a minute. So sausage casings, where did I put them? There they are. Come in many, many different forms. So there are hog casings, which are these. There are sheep casings. There is beef casings, the animals we typically use to make sausage. There are collagen casings. There are non-edible plastic casings. There's all sorts of stuff. There's vegetarian casings, etc. For whatever sausage that you are making, check your recipe and also whatever your desired outcome is, and choose the right one for that. Typically, what is used is going to be hog casings. Now, hog casings come packaged in a variety of different ways. The sort of the rawest or sort of most primal form is going to be just salted, and they are tied up. And now this is the intestine of the animal. So as part of, in keeping with the art and nature of sausage in not throwing anything away, which is a big win for sustainability, of course, The intestines are used. These are washed many, many times and then salted to be cured. Once they are salted, they are now room temperature stable, although I keep them in the fridge. And then once they are soaked, in order to use them again, you have to get that salt off of them, but also then rehydrate and sort of reanimate them. They end up a lot more pliable, a lot more useful. And in order to use them, and I'm just going to say, you know the old saying that no one wants to know how the sausage is made? Well, yeah, there's a lot of rather unpretty things about it. But this is the hog casing. This is what you get when you buy Italian sausage, etc. Most link sausages come with this. And what you do is, this is the sausage casings attachment, and this, you take the blade off. There is another piece that pushes the meat out without cutting it. You put it oftentimes through a casing like this, and then through that ring mold again. That ring lock, excuse me. Let's see. Did I lose my other piece? Uh-oh. Looks like it did. I don't have it in here. I'll have to look through my dishwasher. Must have gotten lost last week. Anyway, there's another piece that fits right on there that pushes out, and this will sit on and then get locked on like this. And now all you're doing is you're pushing that ground meat, the full sausage mixture, right through the tube and onto the casings, into the casings. Now to put the casing onto the tube, you just, once you get it sort of worked on there, you just continuously slide it on. I know this is not pretty, but sausage is delicious, and this is just part of the process. And it might not be pretty, but you know what? That's, well, it's just what it is, and we should respect it for what it is. So there you go. Once you get that all threaded on there, then you just use it and you hold it. You kind of get about a 4-inch section of it, and as that meat begins to extrude through that, as you crank it, you sort of gently pull with it in order to create the link size that you're looking for. You don't want to understuff the casing, because then you're going to end up with sort of a flabby sausage, and it's not going to look right. It's going to have thin spots and thick spots, etc. But also, it's going to have air bubbles in it that are going to be problematic because they will explode while you're cooking them. But also, you don't want to overstuff it. If you overstuff it, then you can't make links out of it later, because there's not enough give or leeway for the sausage casing to let for that manipulation, for you to twist those links. Also, you run the risk of it just expanding and exploding while you're trying to cook it. Now, if you've gone to all this effort, and I will say, last week, I've made so much sausage in my life. When I ran the butchery program at the Culinary Institute of America, I ran the butcher room and was an associate or a fellow teacher there, but really running the room. I made a lot of sausage. And if you go through all the effort to do it, as I did last week, even though I've made quite a lot of it, it's still a process, right? And it's something you've invested your time in, you've invested a lot of inspiration into. Just take your time and do it right. And you know what? If you get the linking of this wrong, start over again. Just pull this off and start over again. You know what? That's going to be a better outcome than anything else. So where do you get sausage casings? Your best bet, honestly, is to go to a place, if there's a grocery store that makes their own sausage, as I have in my neighborhood. Your best bet is to go to them and just ask for what you're going to need. Why? Because sausage casings, when you order them online, where they are widely available from anywhere, come in very large packages where you get 1,000 yards or something of casing. And you probably don't need that, right? So anyway, the first thing to do is just go to a butcher. If you're buying 5-10 pounds of pork from them, whatever, these things are very, very cheap. So they'll probably just go ahead and give them to you. If not, just, okay, charge me $1, whatever. I'd rather it that way than end up with so much that I'm going to waste otherwise, right? Sustainability. All right, so that's sort of how to make the sausage. The other thing is that you don't necessarily have to stuff your sausage if you're doing a bulk Italian sausage. Think about the use that you're going to put this product to. Are you making a bolognese, a tomato sauce with hot Italian sausage? Are you making breakfast sausage patties, right? Well, you don't need to make it into bulk. If you're making a Mexican-style chorizo and you want to just package it up so that you can make tacos with it and just pull it from the freezer and make tacos with it, you don't need to case it up, right? Only if you're making links do you need to do that. So let's talk about some of those links. I've got some here, and then we'll take some other questions. Let's see what I got. I got all sorts of them, right? Yeah, yes I do. So this is the Mexican style chorizo sausage that we made, and this is seasoned with all sorts of stuff. I think 10 or 12 different spices, but it's got achiote powder in it, annatto seed powder. It's got smoked Spanish paprika in it. It's got oregano. It's got all sorts of stuff, a little bit of cumin, onion powder, garlic powder, fresh garlic. You can go nuts with your sausage. And you know what? It's going to be tasty so long as all those ingredients go well in your head, right? They're probably going to go well together in your mouth too. So Mexican-style chorizo. I just bagged this up in little bags that I'm going to freeze and do exactly what I just said, making tacos with that. I have these Sicilian sausages, which I mentioned at the outset. And these are seasoned with red wine, fennel seed, black pepper, red chili flake, onion powder, etc., as well as pecorino cheese, which is a sharp, tangy Sicilian or Southern Italian sheep's milk cheese. And you'll see that I've made these into links. That's just kind of how I intend to use them. I'll probably do sandwiches with these or something. But really, my very favorite way to eat sausage is as part of a salad. Because to me, there is so much richness in this that's all I need. And a 4-ounce link, which is about that size there, about 5 inches in a hog casing, makes about 4-ounce links. That with a salad of thinly shaved fennel, carrot, radishes with some basil leaves topped with a lemon and olive oil dressing, right? Like a huge mound of salad with a very small link of sausage sliced very, very thin once it's been cooked on a grill or under a broiler. Like, that's all I need. When I eat sausage, I eat it as a flavoring more so than anything else. Another dish that I'm going to be making with this, I've got a bunch of clams that we went out and dug the other day, my son and I. So I'm going to be making up a nice Sicilian dish of like a spicy, thin tomato broth seasoned with these sausages in it, and then clams put in there, simmered down until they open, the sausage sliced thin, put back in, a big dollop of glug of olive oil thrown over the whole thing, some fresh basil leaves on top, and chunky, crusty loaves of French bread. Yay! That'll make me happy. That'll make me happy. And then another one, my very favorite of all the sausages, lamb merguez sausage. Merguez, this is traditionally North African. I ate a lot of this when I was living and working over in Morocco, but it's also sort of very Iberian in its influences. So this has roasted red peppers in it, fiery hot chili peppers. It's got garlic, onion powder, cumin, coriander, all sorts of things in there. And I like to leave this. Some people will put this into sheep's casing, which is a very small, thin casing. And to be very honest with you, sheep's casing just wasn't working for me. It just wasn't working. I couldn't get the stuffer to get it out right. So, and that was because I had actually progressive ground this. I'd ground it through a large die and then through a small die. And so it didn't have actually enough texture for me to push it well enough into the very small tube. There was just too much working against itself. So I ended up having to go to a hog casing on this, which I did, and that's fine. So this merguez sausage, merguez is oftentimes made with beef and lamb, but this recipe from Eric Wincoop, one of our esteemed instructors, lead culinary here at Ruby, actually came up with this recipe, and this has pork in it. So I didn't mind going into the pork casing there. Merguez sausage being from a majority Muslim country, just be mindful of that sort of tradition and straying from it if you're feeding it to anybody that has expectations of what it might be. So my very favorite way to do this, I love just these large, long links of it spiraled up. I'll take this whole thing, I'll put it right on the grill and just leave it in this coil. This is how it comes out of the machine once you're grinding it. It just looks beautiful, right? And serve this on the bottom of a giant platter, heaped high with arugula salad, spicy, peppery greens to it. Cut that up and just eat it as is, or as my very favorite use of merguez, ice cold, freshly shucked raw oysters. Sizzling hot, straight out of the broiler, straight off the grill, slices of merguez sausage. Ice cold salty oyster, spicy hot, fiery lamb sausage. Eat them together. Mind blown. It is such a good combination. It's one of my very, very, very favorite things to eat. So, all right. So that's a whole lot about sausage there. I'm going to put these back into the fridge here. So just give me a second because we don't have air conditioning. And it's a very hot day here in Maine. So, and then we'll get to some questions. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate that. That was fun. All right. Let's see. From Judith. Hey, friend. Talk about seafood sausages. Please, possible combinations. So, seafood sausage, there's a number of different ways to make it. First off, you can just do a traditional grind, as I've done with the pork sausages. You end up with a much more crumbly sausage. You have to paddle it together a little bit more, but oftentimes there is the addition of cream and or some sort of dairy product that has been soaked into milk, soaked into breadcrumbs. This is what's called a panade, P-A-N-A-D-E in French terminology. And what this helps to do is helps to create that emulsion. As the bread and the cream-soaked bread helps to absorb some of the liquid, and the bread sort of acts as your binder there. And when you paddle it together, just through mechanical means, you're creating that emulsion and you're getting this nicer, finer texture that ends up with a firmer, crispier bite to it. So the way that I typically make seafood sausage, though, is more of a force meat. So a force meat I make in a Roboku, in a food processor, rather than a grinder. And what I'll do is I'll take a whitefish, anything works, cheap but good. This is the base of your thing. So looking at flatfish, oftentimes sole, plaice, dabs, flounders, if you can find that at great price. Alaska pollock is another nice one. But you're looking for fish that have a very high protein content, as those fish do. They have a very low fat content as well, so it allows you to add that fat in. So you make an emulsion out of this by adding typically egg whites, your protein, salt. Salt is important here because it draws out those water-soluble proteins so that you can get that emulsion quickly. And then you slowly add in your cream to make your force meat while it blends in the canister. And you'll see that it begins to come apart, come away from the sides of the canister. And that's when you know that it's about done, when it becomes very sticky and tacky, that if you just with a press of your finger, it doesn't really come off. Or that it does come off and it's really sticky and it sticks to your finger as well. And then into this, you can fold whatever you want to, whether it being crab or lobster roe as a flavoring ingredient, a little bit of lobster stock. You can put little bunch, diced up shrimp, crab meat, diced up scallops, diced up pieces of salmon, etc. to it. Really, whatever you want to add to this. Can you make a salmon mousseline, a salmon force meat? Absolutely. You just start there. You're going to end up with an orange sausage. One of the things that I like about a seafood sausage is that it gives you that very white, pure base to work with, into which you can very lightly and gently fold whatever other ingredients you're talking about, whether it's very finely chopped fresh tarragon, which is just primo with seafood sausage. Those flavors work perfectly. Then you have those chunks of salmon that are identifiable and beautiful. Really think about any which way you want to. Now, you could stuff those into casings if you wanted to, using a collagen casing, a hog casing, whatever. Or what I think is a lot easier is just using plastic wrap. Get a large sheet of it, larger than you think you might need. Put a couple of dollops on it in a line, and then use it to fold way over. So let's say the pen here is, I've got a big sheet of plastic wrap here. The pen is what I've put there, and it's probably, you're trying to get to a log that's, about an inch thick or so. So about that much. And then fold way over the top of it. And then holding the bottom portion of the saran wrap, kind of pull that top portion back. to kind of wedge that seafood under, fold it back again, and then you can start rolling it from the sides and pulling in that saran wrap or that plastic wrap so that you end up with it fully wrapped into a cylindrical-like shape. And at that point, you then start rolling it out. And that's when pushing it together as you do, and that's when you start to form that log. This is exactly how you form a log with chocolate chip cookie dough too. So this is not such a foreign idea here. It's a skill that you've probably tried to do before if you're not good at already. So kind of as you push in from the sides, rolling it out so it becomes even throughout. Next thing you want to do is look to that saran wrap and maybe prick it, prick any air pockets with a toothpick or a cake testing needle, something like that, just to get those out of there. And then the best way to cook it to me is just simply poaching it. Bring a pot of water up to about 160, 165. You can poaching technically goes to 180. I like it to keep it at the very bottom end of that. Place it in the water. Put a weight of some sort on top of it, not heavy enough to crush it at the bottom, but just to keep it below the surface of the water so it's going to cook evenly. There you go. Cook until you reach 165 because you want that egg white to be fully coagulated on the inside. And there you go. So possible combinations though, I mean, we went through a whole lot of them. My suggestion is to keep it simpler rather than more complex. Right? I mean, you're going to have a really tasty force meat in the base of what you're making. Don't muck it up with too much stuff and get too fancy. And salmon and I think is enough. Maybe with some tarragon, shrimp and dill. That's enough. If you want to mix in lobster roe, beautiful, wonderful flavor just there on its own. Yes, of course, you can mix in all you want and have a carnival of flavors there. Is it worth it? I don't know. Is it fun? Sure. Yep. But certainly try one out first. Get the technique down before you go putting more and more money inside of it. Cheers, cheers. Good to see you, friend. All right. How about hot dogs from Paul C? Well, how about hot dogs? Hot dogs are kind of its own little thing. That is a fully emulsified sausage where the meat and fat and binders are thoroughly chopped and whipped, oftentimes in what's a machine called a buffalo chopper, which is a very, very high-speed food processor meant for this purpose. You can put anything you want to in a hot dog. Why? Because it's all going to disappear into one lovely tube, right? I actually happen to have some hot dogs here. It's amazing to me that somebody just finally figured out to put hot dogs in 4-packs rather than 8-packs. But anyway, hot dogs are then typically fully cooked. These are typically in a synthetic casing. So hot dogs are typically ready to eat. But that texture of hot dog, as you can see, is the difference between that and an Italian sausage. That's going to have that fully integrated, fully emulsified texture to it. This hot dogs also often have a milk powder added to them, added proteins that help the binding, all sorts of stuff. And then they're often cured as well for shelf life with a sodium nitrate. So there's all sorts of hot dogs available out there now, whether it's all beef, whether it's nitrate free, whether et cetera, et cetera. I haven't made hot dogs in 20 years at this point. It is a fun thing to make, I'll tell you that. Yeah, anyway, there's a lot about hot dogs, frankfurters, whatever you want to call them. But yeah, there you go. All right, from Sylvia, can you recommend a high-quality olive oil? Even though individual taste would be individual, I'm at a loss at where to start. Okay. Well, Sylvia, I think great question. Great question. The first question to ask is how often are you going to use it, and what are you going to use it for? In my kitchen, I got a lot of olive oils, partially because I do so many things, and this is what I do for a living, and I spend my entire time in here, so I have use for various olive oils. I have use for fancy, single vineyard, awesome California olive oils, like this from Fat Gold. I really like the flavor of Portuguese olive oil. So I went to a store called Portugalia down in, outside of Woods Hole, just north of Bedford, Fall River, Massachusetts. It's basically like a Home Depot of Portuguese food. Oh my God, it was awesome. So I imagine they have probably an online presence, Portugalia. So I have that. What else do I have? I have a single vineyard French Coratina olive oil here. I got this online. This is probably $85 for 5 liters. Let's see, what else do I have? Yeah, I've got a Meyer lemon infused extra virgin olive oil that I use for very certain things that I love. I have an agrumato, which is a blood orange. Agrumato is when citrus is pressed with the olive oil, with the olives to produce that olive oil, so it's integrated from the outset. So this is a blood orange version of that Meyer lemon. All of that to say, Sylvia, you don't need any of those. You really don't. They really don't. They complicate my life more than they necessarily bring joy to me. I mean, I love the flavors and tastes of all of them. But here's the deal. In my kitchen, I use olive oil in absolutely everything I cook. I have butter, but I use very, very little of it. I have vegetable oil. I go through maybe a cup every half year. I use it basically only when I'm making aioli. That's the only reason I use it for. So what do I have in my bulk kitchen? I have this. This is what I use. You can get this at your local grocery store. I paid $23.99 for this. I used to pay $19.99 until last year. This is what I use. And I have it in a bottle next to my stove, and I go through 2 of these a month. And so I don't want to spend $85 on twice a month. I don't want to spend $170 on olive oil a month. That's ridiculous, right? I mean, to have some fun stuff around that when I'm making a particular salad dressing, when I'm making a particular flavor profile, yeah, that's fun. But this, if I'm sauteing anything, I saute everything I do in olive oil. Why? Well, because I don't ever really saute on super, super high heat to the point where I'm burning the oil. And I'm also sauteing things typically where the pan, I'm going to make a pan sauce out of whatever it is that I am sauteing. So if I'm doing zucchini, well, guess what? The juices of that zucchini, I add the olive oil in, I sear it. As soon as I get just a little bit of color on it, I add the garlic into the oil, and I salt it. And that salt immediately brings the moisture out from that zucchini, and that begins to emulsify as I toss it in with the olive oil in the pan. Done. The whole thing takes about 2 minutes to cook, but that olive oil becomes integrated as part of the dish. That's why I cook everything I do with olive oil. Why? It's also healthier, it's tasty, and I just like working with it, right? So that's what I've got around my house. That's what I use. It is a blend. It says Italian extra virgin olive oil. The dirty truth about the olive oil world is that, a lot of it is lies. Not necessarily that are going to hurt you to any point, but the vast majority of olives are actually grown in Spain and then are shipped over to Italy, where they are then pressed and called Italian olive oil, which at that point it's legally true, I guess. Does that matter to me? I wish it didn't happen. I would be perfectly happy to buy Spanish olive oil, right? So tell me the truth, I'll buy it. But the bottom line is brands like this are sourcing from all over the world, whether it's Morocco or Argentina or Spain or France, whatever. But blends like this tend to be pretty consistent so that you know that what you're buying now is going to be the same a year from now. It's light, it's bright, it's soft on the back palate. It doesn't have all that huge amount of phenolic acid to it that really creates that peppery bite on the back finish. Those, to me, those are great olive oils. They're worth using in small doses for very high flavor impact. This olive oil, for sauteing everything else, you're looking for about a $24 for 3 liters. And for that money, you can get really great quality stuff. So there you go, Sylvia. A little dissertation on olive oil in my life and how I use it, but I hope that helps. And great question. Appreciate you. All right, Catherine, how do you store the sausage? Can they be frozen? Absolutely, they can be frozen. In fact, my freezer is completely full of frozen sausage right now. Why? Because we made 85 pounds last week. Certainly, if you're making a batch of sausage, it's enough of a process that trying to make 4 trying to make 1 pound of sausage is a little bit ridiculous, to be perfectly honest, because it's just a lot of process, and quite honestly, there's enough waste of little bits of product that get left inside this casing, inside the canister, etc., that it's worth it to make a big batch, to make it your own batch, to flavor it really well, and then freeze what you don't need and know that you've got some great quality product in there. So they can certainly store and be frozen. Fresh sausage, it doesn't last very long in the fridge fresh. The reason why is that you've taken perfectly good fresh pork, let's just say, and you've created so much surface area by grinding it that you've created so much opportunity for bacteria to thrive. If you have a full piece of pork, there's no bacteria on the inside. It's all on the outside. But if you take that piece of pork and grind it up, you have exponentially increased the surface area, the oxygen available, etc. It's going to go bad pretty quickly. Also, you've got the fat in there that can go rancid. So yeah, make your sausage fresh, use it up quickly, 2 to 3 days, I'd say max, or freeze it up. And one thing that I forgot to mention in the process of the sausage making is after you've ground your sausage, but before you go to stuff it, if you are stuffing it, make a little test patty and just saute it up. Does it taste good to you? Does it have enough salt? Does it have enough of the things you want it to have in it, right? Taste it before you stuff it, because if you end up going through all the effort to stuff the sausage and then you taste it and you don't like it, well, you got to go back a whole step. It's easy enough just to make a 2-ounce patty of it, taste it. Cool. I mean, it'll keep you motivated in the whole process anyway. So there you go. All right. From Natasha, hi chef. My question is, how do you find something to do with shipment of sage seasoned? How do you find something to do with a shipment of sage seasoned sausage that is over on the sage? It takes everything else I've tried. I made meatballs for spaghetti and it took over the entire sauce. As one example. Okay, gotcha. So the question is, when you have a sage seasoned sausage, fun to say. All of you try it now. Sage seasoned sausage. The sage can be way overwhelming, and that's very much true. Sage, oregano, and rosemary can all really, really come out of their shells when in sausage. In this case, you know what, Natasha, like traditional American Thanksgiving stuffing is one answer for you. Things that already have sort of the expectation of sage in them. But if there's too much sage, I don't know of any real ways to cover that up other than dilution. So I think you're right to try a spaghetti sauce, but maybe cut back on the amount of sausage that you've used in the meatballs if that didn't work, etc. Try making a bolognese where you have a lot lesser density or a lot lesser volume of sausage to tomatoes in there, but you also have that acidity, the onions, carrots, whatever else is in there to help balance that all out. So yeah. That's a tough one. I'm sorry that's you're dealing with that. So cool. Uh-oh. And now I see your second iteration of this question. You have over 400 pounds of it. Oh, geez. Huh. Maybe you could just start to train yourself, do a meditation. I love sage. Sage loves me. I love sage. I'm being a little bit facetious there, but I don't know what to do. As I said, I don't know if there's any remediation other than dilution there. Sorry, but good for you for having 400 pounds of sausage. I'd love to know why that came about. Interesting case study. All right, from Star P. Hey friend, nice to see you back. Nice to have you back with us. Nephew is a hunter and makes amazing sausage. Thanks to a tick bite, he's allergic to pork now. Ooh, yeah. What fat would be best to use rather than pork? Interesting. I don't, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the tick-borne illness that's that, but I believed, I'm not sure it would be just the pork that he would be allergic to, but rather I thought that was about that you became allergic to the blood of mammals. And so it would be more the venison that would be the problem than necessarily the pork fat. So maybe the whole category might be off for you there. I don't know. We've just recently begun to have some cases of that disease borne by the Texas brown ticks up here in Maine. And the name of it is escaping me. But wow, it's very unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear this. Other fats that work like pork, they're not many. I can't really think of any. Butter, even frozen butter would liquefy too quickly in the process, but would sort of work on a similar, fundamentally work on in a similar way. Beef fat might work. It has a much lower solidification point. So the tallow, it just doesn't have that same mouthfeel to it. It gets dry and crumbly in the mouth and sort of palate coating. As pork fat melts it just melts better in the eating experience. So, Star, I'm sorry to hear about all this, and I'm sorry that I don't have a more sort of forward answer for you. Yeah, there's some sort of yeah. Got a block on this one. Sorry. Well, nice to see you join again. So, and you're offering up a couple of suggestions for Natasha, which is sage with ground chicken sausage and throw in some apple. Yep. So sweet and sage can help to balance out and sort of temper that flavor. And Star says he only reacts to pork. That's so interesting. Again, I'm sorry to hear, but thanks for joining, Star. Bless you, says Jose. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Sneeze was a while ago. From Hilda P. Hi, friend. Happy summer, chef. Some sausage comes with casing, which is hard to remove. I do prefer to remove it. So what's the best method? Cheers. So like hot dog casing is very hard to remove. So let's just try this. The way that I do it is I will cut off just a little bit at the top, and then I'll make a sliced down the side of it. And then hot dog casings are very hard because they've already been cooked on. And then sort of just peel down as I go. So trying to get some purchase and some leverage. And then once you get enough of it pulled off, this is just sort of like peeling a sticker off of a book you're giving as a gift, etc. You don't just start in one corner and rip. You kind of work your way down the side and then slowly kind of roll it off, etc. That's what I do. And I typically take the sausage covering off for things like Spanish chorizo, things like that. If it is a raw sausage, it is easy enough just to kind of push it out. Just find the end of it there, and just find the end of the casing, which in this case, and then just squeeze the meat directly out. When raw is probably easier than trying to get it off after the fact. If cooking, just depends on the sausage and the nature of it. So a couple of different techniques for you there. Cheers. All right. Would haggis be considered a sausage? I actually don't know what a technical definition of sausage would be, but it is a force meat of some sort stuffed into some sort of casing, typically animal. So in this case, yes, haggis being sheep's meat with oatmeal and seasonings stuffed into a stomach casing. Yes, I guess that would be sausage. So, yeah, I mean, it works, right? It just has its own name, as it's sort of a unique dish with its own unique cultural heritage and sort of applications, when it's served at celebratory meals and in Irish custom. So, or excuse me, Scottish custom. So, yeah, I guess it would be. Another one from Star. In the 1980s, I made a seafood sausage and wrapped it in plastic wrap to poach it, in which now I know isn't good for me. Yeah, I use a BPA-free plastic wrap that I use here around the house just for all things. So, but you're right. It is wise to be careful of those things. Thanks, Star. What about blood sausage from Vicente? So blood sausage is a wonderful sausage known as morcilla in Spanish, where I used to make it quite a bit when I lived in Spain, also when I worked and ran Jose Andres' flagship restaurant, Jaleo. And blood sausage is pork meat, pork fat, pork blood, and oftentimes cooked rice that is mixed together into a loose emulsion and then stuffed into casings. It is a very loose, dry, crumbly sausage. The blood is used really as a flavoring, but also as protein. to help the emulsion there. But rice and or breadcrumbs are very important to help it integrate in. The flavor of it is delightful. It's a delicate flavor. Not for the faint of heart, but it's also for the faint of palate at the same time, though, because it doesn't have a strong, overwhelming flavor. I think people are more turned off by the idea of it than the flavor of it, especially when paired with something sweet, traditionally like seared apples and cabbage, something like that. It's really a wonderful thing. There's also a deep tradition of this used in French cuisine and Acadian Cajun cuisine as well. And again, the blood is part of the animal, and why should we waste anything whose life we ask to give for us? So I love morcilla sausage, blood sausage. It's a wonderful thing. It needs to be frozen very, very quickly or used immediately after it's being made, as it will go bad very quickly. All right, from start, how would I make a mushroom sausage? Mushrooms, I would probably start with the bulgur wheat. Bulgur wheat as your base. Cook the bulgur wheat out so it becomes light and fluffy and very absorbent. Make a mushroom duxelle type mixture where you're very finely chopping your mushrooms, sauteing them, shallots, garlic, in whatever fat you want or no fat, until they will begin to release their moisture. And the key is to get the moisture out of them for the most part, so it doesn't end up just leaching into the sausage and sort of just creating confusion as to what the structure of this is. Mixing that in with the bulgur wheat, adding your seasonings to this as well. Maybe some roasted red peppers, some other seasonings, things like that, to add some color spikes to it, so it's not just this brown, one singular brown color. But flavorings, think about hard herbs, rosemary, thyme, etc. are going to go really great with those earthy flavors to them. Also, maybe consider adding some acidity to it as well in the form of maybe some balsamic vinegar, something to just brighten those flavors to keep it interesting bite after bite and add a little brightness to it. Cool. Star, you are full of great questions today. Another one, could I sous vide the seafood sausage? Absolutely, you could. That would be a great way to do it. So I've got the sous vide oven behind me. That's how I would do it. Yeah, absolutely. The key is to just get your shape right and figure out how to keep it. If you're really set on keeping it in a perfect cylinder, if you're sous videing it in anything but a water bath, it's going to be sitting at some point. So gravity is just going to flatten down whatever, the side it's sitting on. This is just aesthetic. It does nothing to do with the quality of the execution and the cooking on it, but just one thing to be mindful of. All right, Jules, I may have missed this, but what % of salt do you aim for in your fresh sausages? See, this is different. It's usually, I use about 2 tablespoons of kosher salt per 4-5 pounds of meat is about what I used. I find that is enough. There's so many other flavorings, and also that it gets so integrated as opposed to a pork roast. I might put more than 2 tablespoons of salt on the outside of it because it's not going to integrate fully. But when you season it, mix it up completely, the salt is completely integrated, and then it's ground down. The smaller amount of salt goes a long way in this instance. So I think about 2 tablespoons of salt for 5 pounds of meat and fat is just about right. Cool. Thanks, Jules. And how long do I typically take to bloom your cased sausage? Sausage casings there to bloom them. So truly desiccated salt pack casings. I got after about 8 hours last week, but really soaking them overnight is the best way to do it. It takes you no more effort, really, just a bit of forethought to soak them for 24 hours as opposed to a couple hours, right? But the more pliable they are, the more useful they are, the easier it is to get them on, the easier it is to get them off at the speed that your sausage stuffer is then exuding it out. So that full bloom of 24 hours really is recommended just to get the absolute most workability out of them as you can. And so with that, on the hour, on the dot, we have explored the world of sausage. Thank you all so very much for joining me. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm so grateful for you. Look out for the new Ruby content coming out in our pro course around sausages. Thanks for joining me today, and any other times that you've joined me, please check back as always for our live events. And until then, please know that cooking is an act of love. It is an act of kindness, and that I appreciate you for loving those who you feed. The world needs more of us all. So thanks for being a part of the Ruby family. We'll see you again soon.